I never thought Christmas Eve would end like this. Standing in front of 25 guests, champagne glasses frozen midair, watching my son point at me like I was a stranger who'd overstayed her welcome. His words cut through the jazz music and polished laughter. "You need to pay rent, Mom," like any other tenant. The room went silent. Someone coughed. A woman in a silver dress pretended to check her phone. I felt the marble floor cold beneath my feet, even through my shoes. The Christmas tree lights blurred in my peripheral vision, red and gold bleeding together like a wound. And in that moment, standing there with everyone's eyes on me, I made a decision that would change everything. But before I tell you what happened next, let me ask you something. Have you ever loved someone so much that you had to let them fall? Have you ever had to choose between comfort and truth, between enabling and saving? If this story resonates with you, please subscribe to this channel. We're just starting out, and I promise you'll find a new story here every single day. Stories about real people, hidden truths, and second chances that change everything. Stories that remind us that sometimes the hardest love is the truest love. Hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow's story might be the one you need to hear. Now let me take you back to where it all began. To the moment I realized my only son had become someone I no longer recognized. My name is Catherine Hayes. I'm 64 years old, and for most of my life, I've been invisible. Not in a tragic way. I chose it. I built my life in the shadows, and I liked it there. When my husband Robert built our real estate empire, I was always there, in the background, signing papers in quiet offices while he smiled for photographers, making calls from home while he gave speeches, attending meetings where I was introduced as Robert's wife, and nothing more. While my suggestions were whispered in his ear and presented as his ideas, I didn't mind. We were a team. He had the charisma, the presence, the gift of making people believe. I had the strategy, the numbers, the ability to see 3 moves ahead in every negotiation. Together, we turned a single apartment building in Brooklyn, a rundown place with broken elevators and cracked windows, into a portfolio worth $43 million. It took us 32 years. Every property was chosen carefully, every renovation planned meticulously, every tenant treated with respect. When Robert died 3 years ago, the world mourned a great businessman. The New York Times ran an obituary calling him a real estate visionary. 500 people came to his funeral. They didn't know that half the properties, the profitable half, were in my name. They didn't know I'd been running day-to-day operations for the last 15 years, while he focused on expansion and publicity. They didn't know that the Riverside Plaza deal, his crowning achievement, had been my idea, my negotiation, my risk, and I wanted it that way. Grief is easier when you're invisible, so I stayed in the shadows, managing everything from a small office in Queens, while my only son Ethan lived his glossy life in Manhattan. He thought his father had left him everything. He thought the penthouse on Park Avenue, the Cadillac Escalade, the platinum American Express card his wife Vanessa used for her shopping sprees. He thought it all came from his inheritance, from his father's success, from some trust fund that would never run dry. I never corrected him. Maybe that was my first mistake, or maybe it was exactly what he needed to learn. I've asked myself that question 1,000 times in the dark hours of the night. The months leading up to that Christmas were hard to watch. Ethan had always been entitled. Even as a child, he expected things to come easily. But after Robert died, it got worse. Much worse. He quit his job at Morrison & Associates, one of the best architecture firms in the city. Just walked in one Tuesday morning and resigned. "I don't need to work anymore," he told me over the phone, his voice casual, almost bored. "Dad left me set up. Why should I spend 60 hours a week in an office when I could be living?" Living, that's what he called it. He spent his days at country clubs and his nights at restaurant openings, always with Vanessa on his arm, always posting photos on Instagram, the two of them toasting with champagne, boarding private boats, attending charity galas where they donated my money and accepted applause. Vanessa encouraged it. She loved the status, the attention, the ease of a life without struggle. They had a son, little Marcus, who was 6 years old and who I barely saw anymore. "We're busy, Mom," Ethan would say when I called, his tone implying I was being needy, demanding. "Maybe next month. We have that thing in the Hamptons, and then Vanessa's sister's wedding. You understand." I understood that I was becoming an inconvenience in my own son's life. I started visiting unannounced. The doorman at their building knew me. Of course he did. I owned the building, signed his paychecks, approved his benefits. But Ethan acted surprised every time I showed up. Annoyed even. Like I was some relative who didn't understand boundaries. One afternoon in November, I brought groceries. I'd made a pot of minestrone soup, Ethan's favorite since he was 8 years old. The kind Robert and I used to make together on Sunday evenings, with fresh basil from our little herb garden. Ethan met me at the door in a silk bathrobe at 3 p.m. His hair was messy, eyes slightly bloodshot. "Mom, you can't just show up like this. I brought your favorite soup," I said, holding up the container. It was still warm. "I'm not hungry." Behind him, I could see Vanessa on the white leather couch, scrolling her phone, surrounded by shopping bags from Bergdorf Goodman and Saks. Her nails were freshly done, some elaborate design that probably cost $200. The apartment smelled like expensive candles, something with amber and oud, and emptiness. The kind of emptiness that comes when people have everything and value nothing. "Can I see Marcus?" I asked. "He's with the nanny. We're going out tonight. Some gallery opening in Chelsea. You wouldn't be interested." I left the groceries on the hallway table and took the elevator down, my reflection multiplying in the mirrored walls. I looked small, tired, old. The doorman smiled at me on my way out. "Have a good day, Mrs. Hayes. Cold out there today." "Thank you, Thomas. You too." He had no idea I signed his paychecks. No idea that the building he worked in, the marble lobby he polished every morning, the Christmas bonus he'd receive in 3 weeks, all of it flowed from decisions I made in my quiet office in Queens. When the Christmas invitation came in early December, I was surprised. Ethan rarely included me anymore. I'd become a ghost in my own son's life, haunting the edges, mentioned occasionally but never truly present. "It's a big party, Mom," he said on the phone, and I could hear Vanessa talking in the background, her voice sharp and directing. Vanessa's friends, some of my old colleagues from the firm, a few people from the club. "You should come. It'll be elegant. Wear something nice, okay? Not one of your, something appropriate. Something nice. Something appropriate." I wore the same black dress I'd worn to Robert's funeral. It felt appropriate somehow, like I was mourning something that hadn't died yet, but was dying slowly. The penthouse was decorated like a magazine spread, white lights twisted around the banisters, silver ornaments hanging from a tree so tall it nearly touched the 14-foot ceiling, poinsettias clustered in the corners like small red explosions. The caterers Ethan had hired, using my credit, though he didn't know that, circulated with trays of oysters and champagne. A pianist in a tuxedo played standards in the corner. The Christmas song, "Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas," songs about joy that felt ironic. I recognized some faces when I arrived around 8 p.m., but most were strangers, young, loud, performative. The men wore expensive suits and talked about cryptocurrency and hedge funds. The women wore cocktail dresses that cost more than most people's monthly rent and compared vacation homes in Aspen and Turks and Caicos. Ethan was in the center of it all, laughing too hard, drinking too much, playing the role of the successful heir. He barely acknowledged me when I arrived. "Oh, hey Mom, drinks are in the kitchen, help yourself." No hug, no introduction to his guests, just a dismissive wave before he turned back to some story he was telling about parasailing in Cabo. I found a corner near the floor-to-ceiling windows. The city stretched out below, 43 stories down, a million lights pretending to be stars. I watched Ethan work the room, watched Vanessa cling to his arm like a decorative accessory, laughing at the right moments, touching shoulders, performing intimacy. I thought about Robert, how proud he'd been when Ethan was born, how he'd held that tiny baby and said, "This one's going to change the world, Catherine. I can feel it." How he'd dreamed his son would build something meaningful, something that helped people, not just something that made money. I sipped my wine, a Bordeaux I'd never have bought myself, too expensive for my taste, and felt profoundly alone in a room full of people. "Mrs. Hayes?" A young woman approached, holding a glass of wine, her expression tentative. She was maybe 30, wearing a simple navy dress that looked professional rather than flashy. "I'm Rebecca Soto. I used to work with Ethan at Morrison & Associates." "Nice to meet you," I said, grateful for any real conversation. "He was brilliant, you know. She looked across the room at him. His designs for affordable housing, the project he was leading before he left, they were going to change things. Mixed-income communities with sustainable design, green spaces, community centers built in. He presented it to the board and everyone was blown away. We thought it was going to be his signature project. She paused, took a sip of wine. I don't know what happened. I knew. Comfort happened. The illusion of wealth without the weight of work. A life built on foundations he didn't even know existed, floating on invisible support like a balloon that doesn't realize it's tethered. It happened around 10 p.m. The party had reached that point where everyone was drunk enough to be loud, but not drunk enough to leave. I was ready to go, had already said quiet goodbyes to the few people I'd talked to. Rebecca, an older couple who remembered Robert, the pianist during his break. I was heading toward the door, pulling on my coat, when Vanessa's voice cut through the music. Ethan, your mother is still here, the way she said it, like I was an expired item someone forgot to throw out. He turned from his conversation with 3 men in expensive suits, his face flushed from champagne and performance. Yeah, so? I just think... Vanessa smiled, but her eyes were sharp, calculating. She'd been drinking steadily all night. I just think it's getting late. And we have guests. Important guests. And your mother. She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. Something shifted in Ethan's expression. I saw it happen in real time. The defensiveness. The performance. The need to prove something to his wife and her friends. The need to show he was in control. That he was the master of this domain. He walked over to me, and suddenly I was on display. A spectacle. The room's attention shifted toward us like a spotlight swinging to illuminate a new scene. The pianist stopped playing mid-phrase. Mom, he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. We need to talk. Okay, I said quietly, my hand on the door handle. Let's talk tomorrow, honey. It's late. No, now. His hand was on my elbow, steering me away from the door, toward the center of the room. I could smell the alcohol on his breath, see the tremor in his jaw. I've been meaning to discuss this with you. Ethan, please. You've been staying here a lot, using the guest room like it's yours, coming and going whenever you want. I've visited maybe 3 times in the last 6 months, I said, keeping my voice low, trying not to escalate. You're exaggerating, and I think it's time we set some boundaries. Healthy boundaries. He was looking at Vanessa now, not me, performing for her approval. This is my home, mine and Vanessa's. If you want to keep coming here, if you want to stay in the guest room, you need to contribute. Pay rent, like any other tenant would. That's only fair, right? Everyone agrees that's fair. A few people nodded, uncomfortable but complicit. Others looked away. The words hung in the air like smoke, choking everything. Someone gasped. I think it was Rebecca. I looked at my son's face, his father's eyes, my nose, a stranger's cruelty, and I didn't recognize him. You want me to pay rent? I repeated, just to make sure I'd heard correctly, to make sure this was really happening. Yes, it's only fair. You can't expect to just live off me, live off him. Those words. As if every brick in this building, every fixture, every beam and wire and pipe wasn't mine. As if the ground beneath his feet wasn't ground I'd purchased, renovated, maintained. Vanessa was nodding behind him, her arms crossed, satisfied. A few of their friends looked uncomfortable, but no one said anything. The silence was heavy, thick with judgment and champagne and broken things. I could have told him the truth right there. Could have pulled out my phone, shown him the property deed with my name on it. Could have announced to everyone that the floor beneath their feet, the champagne in their glasses, the catering staff serving them, the building itself, all of it belonged to me. Could have listed every asset, every account, every carefully hidden thread of the life he thought was his. Could have humiliated him the way he was humiliating me. But I didn't. Instead, I picked up my coat from the chair where I'd set it. Okay, I said softly. I'll leave. Mom, don't be dramatic. I'm not being dramatic, Ethan. You asked me to go, so I'm going. I walked to the door. No one stopped me. Vanessa looked triumphant. Ethan looked confused, like he'd expected a fight and didn't know how to react to surrender. The elevator ride down felt like descending through water, everything slow and distorted and suffocating. I watched the numbers light up. 43, 42, 41, counting down like a timer on something that was ending. The doorman looked concerned when I walked through the lobby. Mrs. Hayes, are you all right? Can I call you a car? I'm fine, Thomas. But I need you to do something for me. I pulled out my phone and sent him an email right there in the lobby. Check your email. Forward this to building management first thing Monday morning. There are going to be some changes. The next morning, I was in my lawyer's office by 8 a.m. I'd barely slept. Martin Chen had handled our affairs for 20 years. He'd drawn up our wills, managed our trusts, overseen property transfers. He was one of 3 people in the world who knew the full extent of what Robert and I had built. He didn't look surprised when I told him what I wanted. He just took off his glasses, cleaned them slowly, and sighed. "You're sure about this, Catherine?" he asked. "Completely. It's going to be difficult for him. Very difficult. It needs to be." He looked at me for a long moment. "This is going to hurt you as much as it hurts him." "I know. And you're still sure?" I thought about my son pointing at me in front of 25 people. I thought about the contempt in his voice. I thought about the man he'd become. Shallow, entitled, cruel, without even realizing it. And I thought about the boy he'd been, the one who used to help me plant tomatoes in our little garden, the one who cried when he saw homeless people and asked why we couldn't help them all. That boy was still in there somewhere, but he'd never come back as long as everything came easily. "I'm sure," I said. I signed the papers. Eviction notice, repossession order, credit card cancellations, account freezes, everything that Ethan thought was his, everything he'd believed was his inheritance, his right, his due. I took it back. Not out of spite, not out of revenge, out of necessity, out of love. Sometimes love means letting someone hit bottom, because it's the only way they'll learn to climb. Sometimes, the kindest thing you can do is remove the safety net. Martin walked me through everything. The eviction would take 72 hours, tenant rights laws, even when the tenant was my son. The car repossession would happen simultaneously. The credit cards would be canceled immediately. The country club membership Vanessa loved so much, terminated by Monday. "He's going to call you," Martin warned. "He's going to be angry, probably threatening." "I know. And you're not going to answer." "No. Catherine." He leaned forward, his voice gentle. "Are you prepared for the possibility that he might never forgive you?" I thought about that. Really thought about it. The possibility of losing my son forever, of dying someday with that rift unhealed. "If he never forgives me," I said slowly, "but he becomes a good man, I can live with that." The legal process took 72 hours exactly. By December 28th, at 9 a.m., a process server delivered the eviction notice to the penthouse. Ethan called me 14 times that day. 14 calls I watched go to voicemail, each one harder than the last. By New Year's Eve, the Cadillac was gone, towed from the underground garage while Ethan was out. Vanessa's credit cards were declined at her favorite boutique on Madison Avenue. I heard about it from an acquaintance who happened to be there, who said Vanessa had screamed at the sales clerk, insisting there must be a mistake. Their country club membership was terminated with a polite letter citing account irregularities. And on January 3rd, the penthouse locks were changed. I hired a moving company to pack their belongings carefully and deliver them to a storage unit I'd rented in Queens. Everything protected, nothing damaged, because even in my anger, even in my disappointment, I was still his mother. I watched from across the street that cold January morning, standing behind a food truck selling coffee, as Ethan and Vanessa realized they couldn't get into their apartment. I watched Ethan argue with the doorman, poor Thomas, who'd been given his instructions and was just doing his job. I watched the building manager arrive with the notice of ownership and eviction. I watched Ethan's face as he read the document, as he saw my name, as reality crashed down around him. He looked confused first, then angry, then desperate. Vanessa was screaming, her voice carrying across Park Avenue. Other residents stopped to watch. It was a scene, a humiliation, the kind of thing that would be gossip in their social circle for months. They had to go to the storage unit, rent a U-Haul, move their own belongings. I watched from a distance as they loaded boxes and furniture, Vanessa crying, Ethan's face stone, his movements mechanical. Little Marcus was there too, holding his favorite stuffed elephant, not understanding why they were leaving his home. That part broke me. My grandson, confused and scared, and I was the one causing it. I cried too, standing there behind my sunglasses, my coffee going cold in my hands. Cried for what I was doing, for what I had to do. Cried for the boy Ethan had been, and the man he'd become. Cried for my grandson who didn't deserve any of this. Knowing I was breaking my son's life to save it was the hardest thing I'd ever done. Harder than losing Robert. Harder than building a business from nothing. Harder than any challenge I'd ever faced. That night, I went home to my small apartment in Queens. My real home, the one Ethan had never bothered to visit, with its worn furniture and old photos, and the ghost of Robert in every corner. And I waited. Waited to see if I'd destroyed my son, or saved him. The months that followed were agony. Pure, excruciating agony. I kept tabs on Ethan through mutual acquaintances, through careful questions to people who knew him, through the grapevine of New York's interconnected social networks. What I learned broke my heart in new ways every day. He'd rented a studio apartment in Washington Heights, a rough neighborhood where gunshots sometimes echoed at night. The apartment was 400 square feet with a radiator that clanged and barely worked. I sent someone to check on it anonymously, to make sure it was at least safe, that the building had working smoke detectors, that my son wasn't in actual danger. Vanessa left him within 3 weeks. I'd expected it, but it still hurt to hear. She filed for divorce on January 24th, citing fraud and misrepresentation, claiming Ethan had lied about his assets, had trapped her in a marriage under false pretenses. She took Marcus with her, moved back in with her parents in Connecticut, and got a restraining order preventing Ethan from coming within 500 feet of their property. The divorce was swift and ugly. Her lawyer was vicious, going after every penny. But it turned out everything had been in my name, and Ethan had nothing of his own to give. No assets, no accounts, no property. 34 years old with literally nothing to his name except some clothes and a rapidly declining credit score. She got primary custody of Marcus. Ethan got supervised visitation twice a month, if he could afford to pay for the supervisor. He couldn't, so he didn't see his son at all. That part haunted me. I'd wanted to teach Ethan about consequences, but Marcus was innocent, and now he was losing his father. I set up an anonymous fund to cover the visitation supervisors, funneled through a charity. Ethan never knew, but at least he could see his son. He tried to get a job at Morrison & Associates, his old architecture firm. I heard from Rebecca, we'd stayed in touch, that he'd come in wearing his only remaining suit, which was now too big for him because he'd lost weight. He'd pitched himself as a contractor, a junior associate, anything. They said they'd filled his position years ago, said his portfolio was outdated, said they'd keep his resume on file, which everyone knows means no. He applied to 12 other firms throughout February and March. No one wanted an architect who'd abandoned the profession for 3 years of champagne parties. His resume had a gap, and gaps raise questions. Questions he couldn't answer well. By late March, he was working construction, physical labor, minimum wage. I drove by the site once, unable to stop myself. It was a commercial renovation in Midtown, and I parked across the street, watching through windshield blurred by spring rain. He was carrying lumber, his expensive clothes replaced by work boots and a hard hat, and jeans stained with paint. His hands that used to be soft, manicured, were blistered and bandaged. He looked thinner, older, exhausted, real. I wanted to run to him, wanted to fix everything, write a check, give him his life back. But I gripped the steering wheel and stayed in my car until my knuckles turned white. This was the point, I reminded myself. This was necessary. In April, something changed. My friend Susan, who volunteered at a community center in the Bronx, mentioned casually that they'd gotten a new volunteer, an architect who was teaching basic design skills to kids from low-income families. "He's really good," she said. "Patient with the kids, knows his stuff, and he doesn't act like he's doing them a favor, you know? He acts like they're doing him one." I asked for his name, though I already knew. "Ethan Miller," she said. "You know him?" "I used to," I said. "I started volunteering there too, in a different program, different days. I needed to see this for myself, but from a distance. I watched through doorways as my son knelt on floors with children, helping them sketch dream houses, teaching them about foundations and load-bearing walls, and the way light moves through spaces. He was good at it. Natural. The kids loved him. In May, he enrolled in continuing education classes at City College, updating his certifications, learning new software. He went at night after 10-hour construction shifts, taking the subway with a backpack full of textbooks, studying in the fluorescent-lit classrooms alongside kids half his age. I knew because I paid someone to watch him. Not invasively, just enough to know he was safe. to know he was trying. By June, he'd pitched a proposal to a nonprofit called Homes for Heroes, affordable housing designs for homeless veterans. Modular units that could be built quickly and cheaply without sacrificing dignity or comfort. He'd worked on the plans for weeks, staying up late in his tiny apartment, sketching by the light of a single lamp, because he was trying to keep his electric bill down. They hired him part-time. The pay was terrible, $30,000 a year, barely enough to live on in New York. The work was meaningful. I read about the project in a trade publication in August. They'd broken ground on the first site in Red Hook, 16 units, with a communal kitchen and a garden space designed by Ethan. The article included a quote from him: "Architecture shouldn't be a luxury. Everyone deserves a space that makes them feel human." I cried, reading it, because it sounded exactly like something Robert would have said, like something the boy I'd raised would have said before he'd gotten lost. My son was coming back to himself, and it had taken losing everything for him to find the best parts of who he could be. It was a Tuesday in late August when I saw him face-to-face at the community center. I'd been funding their renovation project anonymously through one of my shell LLCs. New HVAC, updated electrical, a proper kitchen for their meal programs. I wanted to see the progress, to make sure the contractors were doing good work. I didn't expect Ethan to be there on a Tuesday afternoon. But there he was, in the children's section, kneeling on the floor next to a little girl who couldn't have been more than 7. She had her tongue sticking out in concentration, sketching something on large paper. "Make the windows bigger," he was saying, his voice patient and encouraging. "Natural light is important. It makes people happy, makes them feel less trapped, more free." "Like this?" the girl asked, drawing larger rectangles. "Perfect. Exactly like that. You're a natural." He looked up and saw me standing in the doorway. For a moment, neither of us moved. The air between us was thick with 6 months of silence, with everything said and unsaid on that terrible Christmas Eve. Then he stood slowly, wiping his dusty hands on his jeans, telling the little girl he'd be right back. "Mom," his voice cracked on the word. "Hi, Ethan." We stood there, 3 feet apart, an ocean between us. He looked so different. Thinner, yes, but also more solid somehow, like he'd been carved down to something essential. His eyes were clearer. His shoulders, despite the obvious exhaustion, were straighter. "I've been trying to find you," he said, "for months. Your old number doesn't work. Your apartment. I went there and someone else lives there now. I tried calling Martin Chen, but he said you'd asked him not to tell me how to reach you. I moved," I said simply. "I know what you did." His voice wasn't angry. It was quiet, factual, almost odd. The penthouse, the car, the accounts, everything. Martin Chen finally told me the truth last month when I kept calling. He said you'd authorized it, said you'd signed every paper, made every decision, said it was all you, always. I nodded, not trusting my voice. "The buildings too. All those properties I thought Dad left me. They were yours, are yours. You built all of it. Your father and I built it together," I said. "But yes, why didn't you just tell me? All those years, why didn't you tell me it was all yours? Would you have believed me?" I asked. "Would it have changed anything? Or would you have just resented me for it? Felt emasculated, pulled away even more?" He looked down at the floor, at the little girl's drawings scattered between us, a house with enormous windows and a garden full of flowers. "Probably not," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. I was awful to you. On Christmas. In front of everyone. I humiliated you. Yes, I wasn't going to soften it. He needed to hear it. You could have humiliated me right there. Could have told everyone the truth. Could have destroyed me in front of all those people. I didn't want to humiliate you, Ethan. I wanted to wake you up." His eyes were wet. My son, who never cried, who'd been taught that men don't cry, had tears running down his face, making tracks through the construction dust on his cheeks. "I'm sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry. I've wanted to tell you for months, but I couldn't find you, and I thought maybe you'd written me off completely, thought maybe I'd destroyed the only thing that actually mattered. I know you're sorry. I lost everything. Vanessa, Marcus, my whole life, everything I thought I was." His voice broke. "I deserved it. Every bit of it. But God, Mom, it hurt. It still hurts. You lost the illusion," I said gently. stepping closer. But you found something real. Look at what you're doing here. Look at the project in Red Hook. That's real, Ethan. That's who you actually are. I'm barely surviving, he said. I work construction 10 hours a day. I come here and teach kids for free. I work on the veteran housing project at night. I see Marcus twice a month if I'm lucky, and Vanessa's in a good mood. I live in a studio apartment where I can hear every neighbor's argument and every siren. I haven't bought new clothes in 6 months. I'm exhausted all the time. He laughed, a broken sound. And somehow, I'm happier than I've been in years. How messed up is that? That's not messed up, I said. That's growth. He looked at me then, really looked, seeing me maybe for the first time as an actual person rather than just a mother-shaped figure in the background of his life. The buildings, the accounts, all of it. That was you and Dad. Mostly me, actually. Your father was the face. I was the foundation. He was brilliant with people, with vision. I was better with numbers, with strategy. We needed both. Why did you hide it? Because I didn't need credit. I needed results. And because sometimes being underestimated is an advantage. People tell you things they wouldn't tell someone they saw as powerful. We talked for an hour in that community center hallway, sitting on the floor eventually, our backs against the wall. He told me everything. The fear when he'd realized he had nothing. The shame when he'd had to apply for food stamps. The nights he'd cried himself to sleep in that studio apartment. The sounds of the city pressing in through thin walls. The moment he'd realized he didn't know how to do anything useful. Didn't have any skills that mattered. The day he'd called Vanessa begging to see his son, and she'd hung up on him, and he'd understood what he'd lost. I hit bottom, Mom. Completely. I know. I was watching. His head snapped up. You were? Every day. From a distance. Making sure you were safe, but letting you learn. The visitation supervisor fund. That was me. Anonymous safety checks on your apartment building. Me. I needed to know you were surviving, but I couldn't intervene. He stared at me. That must have been torture. It was necessary. Fresh tears fell. I don't deserve your help. I don't deserve you. Ethan. I took his hand. Calloused now. Worker's hands. You're my son. I love you. That's not something you earn or lose. But love doesn't mean enabling. Sometimes it means watching someone fall so they can learn to stand. He squeezed my hand. Thank you. For not giving up on me. For believing I could be better. I always knew you could be. I just needed you to know it too. We didn't fix everything that day. Healing doesn't work like that. It's not a switch you flip or a bridge you cross in a single moment. But we started. We sat in the community center's small kitchen, drinking bad coffee from a pot that had been sitting there since morning. And he told me more. About Jennifer, the social worker he'd started dating. She worked with homeless families, made $35,000 a year, and thought his Cadillac days, as she called them, sounded tragic and embarrassing. She'd grown up poor, worked her way through college, and had no patience for entitlement. She doesn't take any of my crap, he said, almost proudly. When I complain about how hard things are, she reminds me that I chose this, that I'm only experiencing what millions of people experience every day, with no safety net at all. He smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen on his face in years. She's really good for me. He told me about Marcus, about the supervised visits where they went to parks and libraries because he couldn't afford anything else. How his son had asked him once why they didn't live in the big house anymore, and Ethan had to explain that he'd made mistakes, that sometimes we lose things because we don't appreciate them. He's 6, Mom. He shouldn't have to understand that yet. But he will, I said, and he'll remember that his father was honest with him. That matters more than you know. He told me about the construction crew, how they'd made fun of him at first, the college boy with soft hands who'd clearly never worked a real day in his life, how he'd proven himself by showing up every day, by not complaining, by learning, how they'd started treating him like one of them. There's this guy, Miguel. He's been working construction for 20 years, Ethan said. He's sending 3 kids to college. 3. On construction wages. And I used to spend more on a single dinner than he makes in a week. The perspective is... He shook his head. It's humbling. We talked about Robert, about how proud his father would be seeing what Ethan was doing now, about how disappointed he would have been seeing what Ethan had become after his death. He wanted you to build things that mattered, I said. Not just buildings, communities, hope. He used to say that architecture was frozen music, that it could lift people up or crush them down, and it was our responsibility to choose lift. I remember that. Ethan said quietly. I'd forgotten, but I remember. We talked until the janitor came to lock up, this older man named Frank who knew both of us by now, who smiled and said, "Take your time, no rush." Then we walked outside together, into the August heat, the city sweating and alive around us. The sun was setting, painting the buildings gold and amber. "Can I see you again?" Ethan asked, his voice tentative like he was afraid I'd say no. "I'd like that very much. I'm working on a new project. Housing for single mothers. Women transitioning out of shelters or abusive situations. The design is almost done. Maybe you could look at it? Give me feedback? I value your opinion." His voice cracked slightly. "I always should have valued your opinion." I smiled, felt tears threatening again. I'd love to see it. He hugged me then. Really hugged me, not the performative embraces from before. The quick shoulder pats at forced family dinners. The photo op hugs for social media. But something real and desperate and sorry. His arms tight around me. His face buried in my shoulder. His body shaking slightly with emotion he'd finally learned to feel. "I love you, Mom." I don't think I ever really said that. Not and meant it. Not and understood what it meant. "I love you too," I whispered into his hair, which smelled like construction dust and hard work. "That's why I did what I did. That's why I had to let you fall." "I know," he said. "I finally know." 6 months later, February, a year and 2 months after that terrible Christmas, I'm standing in a new building. One Ethan designed. One I funded anonymously through a grant foundation I set up in Robert's name. It's opening day. The ribbon-cutting ceremony. 20 units for families transitioning out of homelessness. The design is beautiful. Big windows that flood the apartments with light, natural materials, communal gardens on the roof, a playground where children are already climbing on equipment designed to be both safe and challenging. A community kitchen where families can cook together, share meals, build connections. Everything Robert would have loved. Everything that makes a space more than just shelter. Makes it a home. Ethan is here with his team, nervous and proud. He's wearing a suit, not an expensive one he bought at a thrift store and had altered. And he's talking to journalists, to city officials, to the families who'll be moving in. He's articulate, passionate, real. This is his vision made concrete and steel. Vanessa isn't here. She remarried already. A hedge fund manager named Brad who has a McMansion in Greenwich. She seems happy in her Instagram posts, the ones I've looked at occasionally, trying to understand what my son saw in her. She and Ethan have worked out a more reasonable custody arrangement. Marcus spends weekends with Ethan and Jennifer now, in the small 2-bedroom apartment they moved into together last month. But Marcus is here today for the ribbon cutting, and he's running through the halls with other children, laughing, his voice echoing off walls his father designed. He's 7 now. And he understands more than he did. Understands that his father is building things that help people. That sometimes people mess up and have to start over. That love means showing up even when things are hard. Ethan catches my eye across the lobby. He's different now. Leaner, harder, more present. He works 2 jobs still. 3 days a week on construction sites. 3 days with the nonprofit. Weekends on freelance projects. He and Jennifer split a modest apartment in Queens, not far from where I live now. He takes the subway. He budgets carefully. He sees his son every weekend and video calls him every night. He volunteers at the community center every Thursday. Last week he told me he's been asked to teach an evening class at City College, Introduction to Socially Conscious Architecture. The pay is minimal, but his eyes lit up when he told me. Jennifer was there, her hand on his shoulder, proud of him. She knows about me now, about what I did. She thinks it was brave. Most parents enable their kids into mediocrity. She told me when we had dinner together last month. You loved him enough to let him become who he was supposed to be. I'm proud of him. Not for the building, though it's impressive, structurally sound, aesthetically pleasing, functionally brilliant. I'm proud because he's building something that matters with his own hands, his own sweat, his own transformed heart. Proud because he shows up for his son even when it's inconvenient. Proud because he's patient with his students, generous with his knowledge, humble about his journey. As the ribbon is cut, and families pour inside to see their new homes, mothers crying with relief, children running and shouting, caseworkers hugging Ethan and thanking him, he walks over to me. Jennifer stays back, giving us space. Thank you, he says quietly. his voice thick with emotion. For what? I ask, though I know. For loving me enough to let me fall. For watching me from a distance. For waiting until I was ready. For all of it. I take his hand, still calloused, still a worker's hand. That's what parents do. We catch you when you're ready, not when you want. We love you through the falling so you can learn to fly. We watch together as a little boy discovers his new bedroom, pressing his face against the large window, shouting, "Mama, I can see the whole city," as a mother touches the walls of her kitchen with reverent fingers, unable to believe this space is hers. As lives begin to change in ways both small and enormous, this is the real inheritance, I think. Not money or property or status, not buildings or bank accounts or social position. Character, dignity, purpose, the courage to start over and build something true, the ability to fall and get back up transformed. Robert would be proud, not of the empire we built, though it was impressive, the work of 3 decades, but of this, of our son, finally becoming the man we'd always known he could be. "Mom," Ethan says, squeezing my hand, "I want to show you something." He leads me to a wall near the entrance. There's a plaque being unveiled, bronze with engraved letters. I read it. In memory of Robert Hayes, who believed architecture could change lives, and in honor of Catherine Hayes, who taught us that sometimes love means letting go so we can grow. I'm crying. He's crying. We're holding each other in this building he designed. This concrete proof that falling isn't failing. It's just the beginning of becoming. "I didn't know you were putting that up," I managed to say. "You've been invisible long enough, Mom. It's time people knew your name. Knew what you built, who you are. I didn't do it for recognition. I know. That's exactly why you deserve it." Later, after the ceremony, after the photos and speeches and tours, we sit on the roof garden. The city stretches around us, millions of lives unfolding in millions of windows. The sun is setting, painting everything gold. "What you did," Ethan says, not looking at me, his eyes on the horizon, taking everything away. "It was the hardest thing anyone's ever done to me, and it was the kindest. I understand that now. It was the hardest thing I've ever done too." "Really?" He looks at me, surprised. "Harder than losing Dad?" "Different," I say carefully. "When Robert died, I was helpless. I couldn't change it or fix it. But with you, I had to choose to hurt you. Had to choose to watch you struggle. Had to choose to stay away when every instinct screamed at me to help. That kind of helplessness. Chosen helplessness. It's its own kind of agony." He's quiet for a long moment. "Thank you," he finally says, "for choosing the hard thing, for saving me from myself." We sit there as the sun sets, as the city lights begin to bloom like flowers, as another day ends and another begins. Mother and son, broken and rebuilt, better than before. You know, I've learned something through all of this, something I want to share with you, whoever you are listening to this story. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for someone you love is refuse to enable their worst self. Sometimes grace looks like consequences. Sometimes saving someone means letting them break so they can rebuild themselves stronger, truer, more authentic. It's the hardest form of love, the kind that costs you sleep and peace and sometimes even the relationship itself, the kind that requires you to watch someone you die for struggle and suffer and learn lessons the hard way. But it's also the most powerful form of love, because it says, "I believe in who you can become, more than I fear what might happen if I let you fall." Our culture tells us that love means comfort, support, being there no matter what. And sometimes it does mean that. But sometimes love means stepping back, means letting natural consequences teach lessons you can't, means trusting that the person you love is strong enough to survive their own mistakes. If this story touched you, if you've ever had to make a hard choice out of love, if you've ever watched someone you care about struggle with consequences they earned, share this with someone who needs to hear it. Share it with someone who's enabling a loved one and doesn't know how to stop. Share it with someone who's hitting bottom and needs to know that falling isn't the end. And subscribe to this channel, please. We're building something here too. A community of real stories, honest struggles, and hope that doesn't quit. Every single day, there's a new story. Stories about people who fell and got back up. People who were invisible until they weren't. People who lost everything and found what actually mattered. Because some stories deserve to be heard. Some truths need to be told. Some falls are the beginning of the greatest rise. My son learned that. He learned that wealth isn't what you own. It's who you become when everything you thought you owned is taken away. It's what you build with your own hands when the inherited foundation crumbles. It's who you choose to be when no one's watching and nothing's easy. We're building that together now. Not an empire this time. Something better. A life that matters. A legacy that isn't measured in dollars or properties or social media posts, but in families housed, in students taught, in communities strengthened, in a grandson who's learning that his father's greatest achievement wasn't the penthouse he lost, but the man he became after losing it. And you know what? There's no inheritance in the world more valuable than that. No trust fund, no portfolio, no empire. Nothing compares to character forged in fire, dignity earned through struggle, purpose discovered in the rubble of what used to be. So if you're watching someone fall right now, a child, a friend, a partner, and you're wondering if you should catch them, maybe ask yourself this: will catching them help them grow, or will it just delay the lesson they need to learn? Sometimes the most loving thing you can say is, I believe you can handle this. I believe you're strong enough to survive your own consequences. I believe in who you can become if I get out of your way. That's what I learned. That's what my son taught me by learning it himself. And that's what I hope you take from this story. Love isn't always soft. Sometimes it's steel. And sometimes the steel is exactly what someone needs to forge themselves into something unbreakable.